Hello watch enthusiasts. Now 8 months ago I produced a video on what I thought were the best value watches on the market at the time. And obviously that video, as you might have seen, has a few rough edges due to the early nature of the video in the channel's history, so I apologise for that, but with this video, this second instalment, I intend to correct some of those rough edges and give a list of a few more watches which I think are also fantastic value and haven't fitted into any of my other videos, or at least have only featured a small amount. And I thought this video was needed because there are a lot of other watches that have come out since that video which I think are suitable for this video. This video also takes into account the newer price changes of these watches recently. And does refer to the current price and the price that these watches have been changed to now, because some of these watches have dropped in price since my last video, hence the fact they're now extraordinarily good value. Now the first watch on this list is a watch from Christopher Ward, and Christopher Ward have produced the Trident for a long time now actually, with the original version with the painted bezel having the 300 metres of water resistance and the slightly less modern dial. But now with the more recent version, which has become all the more crisp, with various colour changes, is now dropped to a price which I think is truly incredible. These watches now cost around the £460 mark, considering they originally sold for £660 on the bracelet. And I think this is very impressive considering the technology going into these watches, with marine-grade steel being used, and a zirconium dioxide ceramic bezel. Equally, these have retained those waves which we used to love on the older Seamasters, but were sadly taken away on the more recent versions, so it's nice to see them appearing elsewhere. But this watch is by no means an homage to anything, it very much has its own style and its own design. Equally, the quality of the movement is very much up to scratch, with the Sleater SW200 or ETA movement, giving the watch a very decent level of accuracy, and makes it easily serviceable. Equally, the finishing of these watches is excellent. Having handled these watches myself, I've found that they offer a very good level of quality, and equally offer beautiful finishes with polishes and brushed segments, giving the whole watch a more varied look than certain other divers around this price point. Equally, the brushing has been softened by adding some bead blasting around the crown and other components to soften the entire look of the watch. The dial is also very nicely finished with those applied indices, which are loomed with C1 Superluminova, making it nice and bright for use at night. Furthermore, this watch has a water resistance of 600 metres, which is very impressive for this price point, and I really do trust Christopher Ward with this depth rating, as they've produced some truly fantastic watches, and also offer some of the best customer service seen in the business today. Also, the warranty on this watch is nice and long at 5 years, which is far more than one would regularly see on a brand of this price and of this size, considering they're not a micro brand by any means, but they're still a small brand, a fledgling brand, if you will, which hasn't yet grown to the size that certain other brands have reached, notably Swatch Group watches. Equally, this watch is very individual in terms of its design, but offers a very neutral design which can be paired with quite a lot of outfits and clothing. And is really appropriate for a lot of occasions. Now, obviously not dress occasions, fundamentally due to the nature of this watch, but nonetheless it's a very versatile timepiece and can be worn with a great deal of attire. Now, equally about this watch, there is the fact that it comes in two sizes at 43 and 36mm, and it's nice to see a smaller watch being issued with exactly the same features as the larger counterpart, but of course being slightly smaller for those with smaller wrists. And this really does make a world of difference for people who would like to own a highly water-resistant dive watch with great modern features, but nonetheless at a smaller size, which is, of course, contrary to what a lot of watches are these days, due to the popularity of larger watches. And don't get me wrong, I do think that larger watches certainly do have their place, but it can be nice to see a smaller offering from time to time. Alternatively, if one is interested in a GMT dive watch, then the price of the GMT version of this watch has also been reduced to about £550, making it very, very good value for a GMT ETA-powered powered dive watch with a 600-meter water resistance. Equally, the bezel has despite gaining the various markings to be a 24-hour bezel, has also retained some markings to make it a dive bezel with that loom at 12 o'clock, making this watch a very versatile timepiece. Now, the next watch on this list is from Hanhart, and I think this watch is one of the most fantastically priced pilot's watches on the market. And this watch comes in around the £900 mark, but for the features it offers, I think it really is very, very well priced. Now, this is a stainless steel pilot's watch, which isn't a chronograph, which is unlike Hanhart, because every other model in their range, apart from this, as far as I'm aware, is a chronograph. And that's because they became legendary in the early 1900s, producing a number of stopwatches for timing, and they were an interesting brand because they produced the first affordable stopwatch, and it was all in-house designed as well. In fact, their movements were used for quite a few years in watches. Of course, they also produced a great deal of pilot's chronographs, with that famous red pusher. But this watch takes a step aside from that, and goes towards a far more simple aesthetic. So this actually has a Sleater SW200 at its core, and that's underneath this beautifully finished stainless steel case, which is brushed with a few polished edges. It equally has a very simple and minimalistic dial, which reminds me of 1930s pilot's watches, and equally a very simple and comfortable case in terms of its soft edges. And it also has beautifully finished hands, which are these cathedral style, which are highly legible. Of course, these hands are also finished very, very nicely with loom in their various gaps, which allows for high legibility while retaining a very classic look. Equally, the crown is left unprotected, but that just adds to the large crown style of pilot's watch that this watch harks back to. Equally, it has those enclosed railway-style second, or rather in this case, minute markers around the dial, which add to that very vintage aesthetic while retaining modern technology, such as the fact that this watch has that Sleater SW200, which has been modified in-house by Hanhart to have 30 joules rather than 26, and equally has small seconds at 9 o'clock rather than normal central seconds. Now, this history of the watch really does add to the interest of this timepiece, but equally the fact that this watch is a great departure for Hanhart from the sort of standard variants of pilot's watches they produce. So therefore, I think this version of the Pioneer, which in this case is the Pioneer Preventer 9, which is truly a fantastic watch in terms of its design, but equally its mechanics on the inside are rare at this price point, and it's difficult to find a watch with a modified, an in-house modified movement produced by a small brand, which is still very much a historic brand for this price. Of course, another interesting fact about this watch is the fact that it's water resistant to 100 metres, which means that it's pretty practical really on a daily basis, because despite the fact that it doesn't have a screw-down crown, it does still have that high water resistance, which is practical if one wants to actually go for a swim with this watch, because I'm sure it would hold up. Equally, an interesting point about Hanhart is they're actually a favourite brand of Steve McQueen, and it was seen in one of his films. He was wearing a Hanhart 417, I believe, which is a chronograph with a simple pilot's dial, but it does show what a legendary brand this is. Of course, the beauty of this watch is in its versatility. This watch can really be worn in most settings due to the fact that it's as practical as a sports watch, with that high legibility and water resistance, but equally with the elegance of the first half of the century, with that beautiful style of case and dial. It also looks fantastic on a leather strap, as is shown here with those rivets. And of course, all of this with that fantastically modified movement can be bought for about £900 from Page & Cooper, which is, and I really am not being sponsored or paid to say this, but I've bought various products from Page & Cooper over the years, and I must say I really appreciate their service and the quality of their products, which is why I would recommend them if you're going to buy a Hanhart. Now, this next watch is one which I think really couldn't be excluded from this list, and this is the Seiko Marinemaster 300. And this is an interesting watch because it sits at the top of the Seiko Marinemaster range before one goes into the Grand Seiko segment of Seiko dive watches. But I think this watch offers fantastic value for around the £1,500 it costs to buy, and the prices of this watch have actually dropped since the last video I made. So it certainly has made it onto this video. Previously it was around the £2,000–2,300 price mark, but now it's dropped to around 1,600, 15 to 1,600, which really is exceptional considering what this offers. A steel case, and this is quite a large and thick watch, but nonetheless is beautifully finished. It has holes lugs to make the removal of the bracelet and the addition of a strap easier, and I must say I appreciate that on a watch of this type in the dive watch format. So this has a 300-meter water resistance, and that's thanks to the monoblock case design of this watch, which means that there is no opening case back. It's a solid piece with the rest of the case. This means that when it's serviced, the front of the watch has to come off, but this does ensure that there's no gasket or seal degradation over the years in the case back, and reduces the points of entry for water, which is again an interesting and practical feature. Equally, the front of the watch does also show the craftsmanship inherent in Seiko's watchmaking, and especially at this price point. So it has a matte black dial with these hand-applied lume indices, which are beautifully metal rims. They're applied to the dial, and then one can tell they're hand-filled with lume, on the basis that the lume level undulates slightly in a very different way to the way that it seems when they're factory produced. Equally, the dial of this watch is very minimalistic and very simple, doing only what it needs to do, having the date carefully circled at 3 o'clock, and then the rest of the dial given light touches such as the 300 meters and professional on the dial. Equally, it has these beautifully brushed hands, which are very legible, but nonetheless quite simple, and certainly don't look like any other dive watch hands on the market. Also, that second hand is very distinctive of older Seikos, and this watch certainly does hark back to older Seikos while retaining a very modern aesthetic, which can be worn with modern clothing and modern attire very easily. Now, the bezel insert of this watch is actually metal, but it's lacquered and finished in a very high polish to give it the aesthetic of ceramic, but actually has a great deal of craftsmanship go into it, as it's lacquered several times to give it that high gloss finish. And this is typical of vintage Seikos, which this watch is trying to hark back to, and certainly does show that Seiko is trying to recreate something of the past with modern features. Furthermore, this watch bridges the gap between Seiko and Grand Seiko in terms of the movement inside this watch and the finishing of the case. So the case finish is highly polished on the sides and then brushed on the tops, and certainly does hold up to the Grand Seiko quality of finishing. And that's because, of course, this watch sits at a higher price point than other Seikos. Equally, the movement is pure Grand Seiko. It's a Grand Seiko movement, which is, of course, in-house to Grand Seiko. And it's not a high beat or a spring drive, but it's still a high-quality, very limited Grand Seiko movement, which is very interesting to see, and certainly a very nice touch in a watch of this price point. Now, the bracelet of this watch is also interesting to note, whereas, for example, the Christopher Ward comes with a simple deployant of very high quality, I have to say, with a dive extension. This actually has a ratcheting extension, which allows you to regulate the length of the strap, of the bracelet rather, very closely and adjust it on the fly if your wrist expands in hot weather or contracts in cold weather. This watch will always fit perfectly, which is a very nice touch, and really isn't seen at this price point. This is also the only real in-house watch I can think of around the £1,500 price mark in the dive watch category with these features and this quality with in-house movement, which really is fantastic to see. Equally, the watch itself is very distinctive and very different to anything else on the market. And to those who like the Seiko Sumo with its style of case and dial, you'll love this watch at a slightly larger size. Now, the next watch on this list is the Nomos Orion, and this is a watch which has interested me for a very long time because of its beautiful aesthetics. And this, I think, is the best value dress watch there is, as far as pure dress watches go in their most basic form. Now, this follows a very Bauhaus style, with that very, very minimalistic dial, verging on overly minimalistic dial, but I think it truly is a beautiful combination with those very straight and narrow hands with that beautiful sub-second dial at the 6 o'clock mark. Now, Nomos is obviously quite a young brand from the late 90s, and they're an interesting brand because they produce entirely in-house movements. Now, they're a German manufacturer, which have this classically German Bauhaus aesthetic from the 1920s, which truly is a beautiful aesthetic and beautiful design, and very different to other German designs which previously had been very ornate in the sort of Prussian era. But nonetheless, this is a beautiful watch and certainly an interesting piece with regards to its movement. And due to the incredible thinness of this watch, this movement is manually wound, but it's an in-house, fully decorated, manually wound movement from Nomos themselves. Equally, what's nice about these Nomos in-house movements is they don't cost the earth to repair. Obviously they have to be sent back to Nomos due to their unique nature among brands, but nonetheless, a service of one of these movements can cost as little as £200, which is about the same as an ETA movement, which really is quite impressive. Now, what is most impressive about this watch is its height at 7.25mm. This is an incredibly thin watch, which really is the ultimate in terms of good value dress watches of a very, very elegant design. Now, equally, these watches are finished entirely with this polished finish, and have these very minimalistic lugs which jut out beautifully to give an 18mm lug width. Equally, the weight of this watch is similarly fantastic at 40 grams, making this watch very, very light on the wrist, and in fact disappears on the wrist. Having had a look at one of these watches and tried one on, I must say they really are incredible on the wrist, and don't really feel like anything else on the market. Now, they come in two different sizes, a 35 and 38mm version, with the 35 coming in at around £1,500, and the 38mm version going from about £1,500 through to the £2,200 price mark. Now, though they're not very water resistant with a splash-proof rating of 380M, but then this is a watch which is only to be worn on formal occasions, really, and wouldn't really work with casual wear if you were going swimming, for example. Now, what is very appealing about this watch is that despite its 35 and 38mm sizes, it does have quite a long lug-to-lug distance, so as a result is actually wearable in either size, really, on any wrist, and is deceptively large considering its small size. So I must say it's a very comfortable wear and certainly a beautiful watch for any formal occasion. Equally, this watch has without a doubt the most beautiful movement for under £2,000 I've seen, with this full decoration and beautiful blued screws. And also the manually wound aspect of this movement does, in my opinion, make the whole movement more visible due to the absence of a rotor, and equally increases the owner's involvement with the movement, as it has to be wound every 43 hours. Now, this next watch jumps up in price a little bit, but I think is entirely worth it. This watch costs at retail £4,000, but in truth, in most situations, one can get these watches for less than that. And this is the base, well, if anything like that ever existed, Seiko Grand Seiko Spring Drive. And this is an incredible watch for the features it offers. Now, this isn't quite at the level of the Snowflake, for example, with its titanium case, but nonetheless, this offers a very high quality entry into the Grand Seiko Spring Drive style of watch, and certainly does offer the same features as its larger brother, the titanium Snowflake. So within this watch, or rather within this stainless steel, beautifully finished case, is Seiko's Spring Drive movement, and this is notable because it's a really incredible movement for the features it offers. So of course this movement has a normal automatic rotor and so on, including a spring. However, rather than having a normal escapement, this watch has a quartz escapement, whereby the movement of various wheels induces a current in the escapement, allowing it to run through a quartz escapement, and gives a perfectly smooth run of the second hand, while adding incredible accuracy. Now, this accuracy comes in at around 1 second a day. However, that's Seiko's claim, whereas I've heard from a great number of people saying that actually theirs will keep time at a third of that, really, giving 1 second every 3 days, which really is incredible for a mechanical movement. Of course, this watch does also offer the features of being 100 meters water resistant, and comes with a fantastic stainless steel bracelet. The case also hugs the wrist very nicely and allows it to wear, if anything, more comfortably than a Rolex Oyster. Now, this also offers incredible features considering it's at the same price as a Rolex Oyster, In fact, slightly less than a Rolex Oyster. And considering its form as a fantastically inventive and innovative design in terms of its movement, I think this is fantastic value. It also comes with a rather interesting placement of the power reserve indicator, with a beautiful recess in the dial at about the 730 point, which I think really does add a certain interesting level to the dial. The dial is also finished beautifully with fantastically polished indices and those brilliantly designed hands, which make the whole watch very legible, while retaining a very dressy and very classically Grand Seiko look. Anyway, I shall conclude this video with this watch, because I think this is another set of a few watches which I think have recently become very, very good value in the watch world, and truly I do think these watches are very much worth people's interest. Anyway, I hope you enjoyed this video, and if you did, then please do like, share and subscribe to help the channel and see more content. So thank you very much for watching. This is I'm the Watch Guy, over and out.